Hi, I'm Sydney. Welcome back to my Flock and Squawk. Have you ever been looking at Uno cards and thought, that would be a really fun coaster idea? So let's make it. Last week I spun the wheel and it determined that we should be making some applique coasters. So let me catch you up to speed on how we get up to this point, and then we'll finish these off. Getting started with this project, the first thing that I did was I found some clip art of a Uno reverse card. All I did was Google search Uno reverse card clip art, and then I scaled it inside MS Paint. I find MS Paint to be the easiest option just because it's so basic. I scaled it using the scaling options in the printing section and then printed it out. Once I got a copy that I thought was the right size, it was time to pick some fabric. Shh! Don't tell Mom that I stole from her stash. We got our fabric, let's go. Fabric thieving aside, I used this lightweight fusible interfacing. It is so thin, but basically I am going to use this not by ironing it onto my fabric, but just tracing the design of the Uno card. Here are the fabrics that I ended up going with. I decided to just go with a red and a green option and make 2 of each color. I also grabbed some white for the background fabric, and for the very back I decided to go with a gray color. Here's my printout. Like I was saying, I'm just going to trace on to that interfacing, and starting with it, I'm going to be using a light box. I don't think you need it with how thin this interfacing is, but you never know. It's always nice to have the option, as well as taping it down, taping the paper that is, and then gently tracing it. It's so thin that a lot of my marks actually just go straight through onto the paper below. I occasionally turned off the light box just to make sure that I was seeing my lines and that I was actually making marks. After it was all traced out, I cut out my pieces. What you're going to want to do is to cut out around them and not on the actual trace line. I gave my fabric a quick press, and I'm going to be just showing off on the green for the rest of this project. I'm taking my pieces now and I'm just sort of laying them out best I can on the fabric to kind of optimize space while still leaving some seam allowance. I pinned each piece down in a couple spots, and now it's time to go under the sewing machine. The reason you did not want to actually cut out on the line that we traced is because that is the line that we're going to be sewing on. So I just took it careful under the machine with a short stitch length and slowly and carefully sewn on the trace line. So here you have it, my stitched out pieces. You can see it very well on camera because of the white thread that I used, and resist the urge to press at this point. This is a fusible interfacing after all, so I'm just going to take my scissors and cut out each piece. I like to do a rough cut and then do a finer cut. Once you have your piece cut out, clip any pointed corners. So these corners, I just snipped that off, and then with that curve I'm just doing a couple little slits, so that way it'll hopefully turn nicely. And then we are taking and pulling the fabric and the interfacing away from each other and cutting just into this very fine interfacing. By making a hole in it, we can actually turn this right sides out and have all of our edges gently fold under. It's a very delicate process, and it's very frustrating when the interfacing does rip, so just take it very carefully and slowly. I highly recommend using either a swizzle stick, a pencil that's very dull, or other tool. I have this tool that's called That Purple Thing, and so I just gently use that to turn my pieces. There was one piece that the interfacing ripped a little bit too much on, so I used the tiniest dollop of Elmer's glue on the raw edges to make sure that they were folded under. I just gently made sure all of it was turned under properly, and here you can see one piece is ready. Once all my pieces were turned, the oval was actually the easiest just because it's one large piece. I took my background fabric, the white, and laid out my pieces. So I just sort of made sure that they were properly laid out, referencing the Uno card that I had, and that they were placed properly. And then I just took my iron and gave it a quick little press. The fusible nature of the interfacing will help it stick a little bit to the white, but for the most part it's just sticking the green to the interfacing itself. So I added a couple pins on each piece, and very carefully, with a matching thread this time, or as close as I could get, I stitched on top of those pieces. I just carefully traced them out so that they would be fully stitched down to my white fabric. And with that, we have the start of the card. So this is what we're looking at. You can see my light little stitching along the edges of each piece, and then on the back you can see the stitching kind of well. You can kind of see it on camera. And then I changed my mind and I'm going to do a second type of applique using the steam seam. So let's get it traced out, or let's get the arrows traced out. So steam seam, if you've never used it, you can trace your design on it and then you stick it to your fabric, and then, so basically it turns your fabric into a sticker. I know I'm not explaining it too well, but it mirrors your design. So whatever you trace onto it, you want it to be the mirror image. And then you stick it to your fabric, and then you can peel off the other side of the paper and turn your fabric into a sticker, stick it onto a different project, and then heat set it with an iron. It's not like you're not required to stitch on it, however, I don't think that it's secure enough to do without stitching. So after I cut out all of my arrows, both big and small, I traced it onto the steam seam, stuck it onto my white fabric, cut out my arrows, and then I stuck those to the Uno cards that I have created. After sticking them to the Uno cards, because I feel that it's more secure and a little more accurate to the Uno cards, I decided to stitch around each arrow. I can't speak. Stitch around each arrow with a dark black thread to give a little more dimension, a little more to my cards. So once I got those all secure, little heat set with the iron, stitched them, and with that my Uno card is up to date for what's in the intro. So we all have our Uno cards at the ready. I have 4 of mine all made up. So I got these 4, and then I have 10-inch squares to be the backing. And since these are quilted, you're going to need some batting. So I have a scrap piece that'll work for me from a previous project, but basically you want it to be able to be sandwiched in between your project. It's always nice to have a little extra around your edges, so that way you know you're not missing anything. Same with your background. You want your background squares to be large enough that there is some extra in case it shifts. So I have my applique, Uno cards, the batting, the backing. I'm going to be using this spray adhesive, essentially. It is so that way you can have things stick together without using pins. It's basically like a type of washable, fabric safe spray adhesive glue. For the other pieces, since I'm doing it on a domestic machine, aka a normal, regular, everyday sewing machine, I have this free motion foot that is essentially like the foot that you'll want to do for embroidery on a domestic machine. You can just look up your brand of machine, mine's a Janome, and then you can look up like free motion, that type of embroidery foot, and it looks a little something like this. And then my machine specifically has a plate that I put over so the feed dogs aren't activated.
So let's get closer to the machine and put these pieces on and get ready to embroider, quilt these things.
While it can be a little intimidating at first, taking off your presser foot is actually super simple. So you could just pop off your foot itself. However, for this foot specifically, you want to unscrew the entire piece that holds your foot together. This one, you can see here my normal foot. I can take it fully off, and then we are using the same screw, same hole that came out of, and just adding on this embroidery free motion foot. It's also known as a darning foot and by some other names. Your machine might just have a setting to lower the feed dogs, but mine has a physical plate that just pops over, and you just line up the holes and pop it in. The only step left is to set my stitch length to 0, so that way the presser or the feed dogs don't do anything.
Now that my sewing machine is all set up to be able to free motion quilt on it with replacing the foot and putting the feed dog cover on, let's assemble the sandwich that our coasters essentially will be. So what I am going to do is adjust things on my table and give you an overhead shot of how this is going to work and come together. And then we will finally get it under the machine to quilt. So here we have the tabletop, and let's just adjust some things out of the way. So what we are going to want to do is take our background squares. I'm going to need another one, but we are going to take this and make sure our piece fits over. I'm going to put in some pins so I have an idea of where the background actually is. So up there, you can just ever so faintly see it. So what we are going to want, put that there. Take our block, make sure that it fits nicely between the pins. And I'm going to take the spray adhesive, the basting adhesive, and I'm just gonna, okay, it's tacky, ever so gently press that in. I'm going to move my pins. And then I'm going to flip this over, adjusting my pins, of course. So that way I can baste a little on this side. Now that things are sandwiched, I'm going to take my scissors and give a little trim. So now these are stuck together, and while I don't really need the pins, I'm going to just put them there for some added security, stability. And now this one is all ready to go under the machine. So I'm going to repeat this for the rest of them, and then we will get to stitching. So all of mine are sandwiched. They have the spray adhesive to hold them together, as well as just a couple pins. And in my top thread for my machine, I have white because that is what is facing me, and I'm going to only quilt on the white part of this project because I've already sewn down the applique, and I kind of want to maintain the look that the applique currently has, so I'm just going to kind of sew in the white around things. And then in the bottom, because I have chosen gray and, you know, a darker color for the back, I have black in my bobbin. And like you saw, I have my machine all set up. I changed my stitch length to 0, which means that I, as someone holding the fabric, have full control over stitch length. It fully depends on how I pull the fabric through. If you're uncomfortable with this, I would recommend practicing on scrap pieces just to get a feel for how it kind of goes, what it's like, and then maybe working on a project like this, like I'm showing you, to kind of, it's low stakes, low effort. This is a gift for myself and not for anyone else. So we are going to readjust the camera so you can see what we're doing. My first thing that I'm going to do is actually stitch sort of a support line, and then I'm going to stitch the rest of the project. I'm going to do a top stitch across the top just to kind of get a feel for things, as well as it helps secure the fabric layers when you're working on the rest of it. So let's just get to stitching. I'm going to bring the camera in close, like I said, so you get a nice clear view of what I'm doing and what's going on under the machine.
So I am not going to lie, this project actually gave me quite a bit of grief here. I sounded so confident, and I felt very confident when I filmed that portion just before this. However, I did have to take out my bobbin and rethread my machine quite a few times. So the moral of the story is be patient with yourself, be patient with your project. And thank goodness this was a low stakes one. But here you go, here you can see my quilting.
So we are all done with quilting and I trimmed them down, so it is time to bind. So I just took some of this double fold bias tape and carefully pinned and adjusted it around the edges. I changed out my sewing machine foot to the normal, just standard machine foot, as well as took off the plate that covers my feed dogs. I changed my stitch length back to a standard 2.5 that I use. And now it's time to finish off with the edges and this binding. So you can do this however you like. I am just going to use the double fold bias tape because I have plenty of it. And I want to just finish off this project.
And with finishing off these beautiful coasters, time to play the game that I have had in the back of my head ever since I conceptualized these Uno reverse card things. Coasters, that's what they are. So I just picture playing a game and whopping that out just to be like, huzzah. So there you have it. That is how I made these gorgeous Uno card coasters. They are larger than what most people will probably think of for coasters, but that just means they're a little more usable. You can use a large cup, small cup, a bowl, but I kind of am inspired to maybe do some placemats in the future. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you flock and squawk again with me sometime. So let us spin the wheel to see what category of video I'm going to be making for next week. If you enjoyed the wheel, please let me know in the comments down below, because it's just something I'm trying out. And like I said, I have been watching Good Mythical Morning, so I am a little inspired to try and use it in some way. If you don't like this concept, please let me know as well, because I kind of just want to gauge people's feelings on it. Because I myself am also unsure on this whole thing. It helps with making decisions, of course, but let's see. Oh, black. That means that we are going to be doing a baking video, so join me next week for that. I hope you flock and squawk again with me sometime. Bye!